So we're trying to finish up on the laws of Birchas HaTorah. And if you have the pages that David sent out way back when, we got up to page 448. And we're going to try to understand if Birchas HaTorah is d'oraisa, which is certainly the Shita of the Ramban, maybe even the Rambam, we're not sure. What happens in the case of a person who is up, he was awake, and Lilmod Torah, and he, let's say, for example, we give an extreme example. Let's say if you hold that bar mitzvah is called be'es le'es, so we calculate 365 days times 13 from the moment he was born, which obviously could be in the middle of the day. So on that day, when he achieves bar mitzvah and he becomes chayav in mitzvahs d'oraisa, the first part of that day, he was still a katan. And he becomes bar mitzvah, let's say at 9 a.m. He was born at 9 a.m. Now, he already recited Birchas HaTorah, let's say when he woke up in the morning, for example. But at that point, he was still a katan. Now he became a gadol at 9 a.m. And the issue is, does he have to recite Birchas HaTorah a second time around? Again, let's assume that from the three brachos that we spoke about last week, only the last of the three is d'oraisa, asher bachar banu mikol amim. That bracha, he should now have to recite a second time, because the Gemara says in Masechta Sota that if he heard the shofar as a katan, and now he became a gadol, he would have to hear the shofar a second time. The shofar that he blew as a katan is not motzi yedei chovet d'oraisa when he becomes a gadol. The Gemara has another case where he was a shoteh and he ate matzah, and then in the middle of the night of Pesach, Leil Chamishasar Nisan, he became a pikeach. And the Gemara says he's required to eat matzah again. So on a d'oraisa level, he did not fulfill his mitzvah of Birchas HaTorah, Kishem Hashem Ekra, when he recited those brachas at night. He was not yet a gadol. And now that he became a gadol, he would have to recite Birchas HaTorah, at least the last of the brachas, again, in order to fulfill his mitzvah d'oraisa. And this is a discussion in a sefer called Shut Marsham. Marsham, if you heard of the Marsham. So he writes the following. Nar shebo lilmod Torah b'leil har mitzvah, tzorech lachzor ulevarich birchas haTorah shenis, shekain b'shachris, meaning early that morning, b'shach shebirach hayadayin katan, v'chiyuvo b'birchas haTorah gak midrabanan, amal ato with an eye, and now he's chayv d'oraisa. Now, if you recall, we discussed different categories of brachos, and there's Birchas Shevach V'Odaya, there's Birchas HaMitzvah, and there's Birchas HaNenin. I mean, there's a fourth category, but these are the main primary three categories of brachos. And the Rambam writes in the 11th perek of Hilchos Talmud Torah, of Hilchos Bracha, of, one second, of Hilchos Tefillah, The Rambam writes that before he learns Torah, he has to recite the brachas, which means that the bracha is a matir that permits him to study Torah. So now the question is, if he was mevarech that bracha as a matir before he became a gadol, is that matir chal even now that he's a gadol? And he writes, Lefi ha'amur shebirchas HaTorah begetter birchas hanenim, or what we call birchas hamatir, l'chora ain't sarach levarech b'leil bar mitzvah, shekain lo matzinu shenar shebirech bori priya eitz al pri, v'hischil lechol lifnei shenase bar mitzvah, v'nimshecha achiloso ad shechashecha, v'nase bar mitzvah, lo matzinu sheyomru sheyachzov yavarech. Imagine the case on Erev, the eve of his bar mitzvah, he made a bar priate, started eating the apple. He didn't finish the apple until after sunset, and now he became a bar mitzvah. Does he need a new matir of a Birchas Hanenim, or it's enough that he recited Birchas Hanenim before he became bar mitzvah? We never found a Shulchan Aruch or a halacha that requires that a katan who becomes bar mitzvah would have to reiterate his Birchas Hanenim. And if we assume that the purpose of Birchas HaTorah is to be matir, first we have to acknowledge that God, you gave us the Torah, you separated us from the nations, and that allows us to study from his holy Torah, then, like any Birchas Hanenim, when a person becomes a gadol, he does not have to repeat the Birchas Hanenim. The only trouble with this Marsham is that he doesn't explain why. Why is it that the Birchas Hanenim, I hear the problem. You should logically say that now that he's a gadol, he needs a matir of a Birchas Hanenim. Okay, he recited the bracha when he was what? When he was a katan. Joe? You'll have to just unmute yourself. You know how to do that?
Yeah. Sorry. I'm just wondering, why aren't they even asking a different question? That with regards to, like we have with tzitzis, right? You have a talis cotton, you have a talis gadol. You put on your talis cotton in the morning. You don't, they say the bracha on the talis cotton. You wait until you put on the talis gadol, correct? You say you make the bracha there.
Personally, I don't do it exactly that way, Joe. I say it depends. If I'm on the way to shul and there won't be a long hefsek, then I don't make the bracha on the talis cotton. But if I know that before I get to shul, I'm going to go to mikveh, or I'm going to have a learning seder, and it's going to be an hour until I put on my talis gadol, then I'll make a separate bracha al mitzvah tzitzis on my talis cotton. But go on, let me not stop you from your.
No, so that's gonna answer my question, because what I was gonna say is, why aren't they telling him, don't even make the bracha in the morning, wait until you become a gadol to make the bracha of Birchas HaTorah then, because then you'll be able to do it on a higher level. So, but your answer is basically that.
Yeah, I'm saying right now he's a katan. And as a bar chinuch, he's obligated the mitzvah b'toras chinuch midrabanan of reciting the bracha. Tomorrow he becomes a gadol, meaning in the morning, and he already made the bracha, or he made the bracha in the morning, and then later on that day, or for example, he makes the bracha asher bochem banim kol anim every morning. This morning he was a katan, and now he wants to learn Torah at night. It's already bar mitzvah at night. Let's say either because of Meis Leis or because of Miyom Liyom, whatever shita you're going with, he became a gadol that night. And he says it's no different than making a bar priya and then continuing your achila into the night when he becomes a bar mitzvah. We never found and never heard that he should have to repeat the bar priya. So if you assume that Birchas HaTorah is a doraisa, is a matir, and it should be categorized as a Birchas Hanenim, Because the Gemara says with the Kal V'chomer that Madach, if you nene from Olam Haseh, which is Chayisha, you have to make a bracha, and that's derived from Birchas Amos and Lachreha. Then how much more so for Chaye Olam, which is Talmud Torah, for sure you have to make a bracha. So it's all derived from Birchas Hanenin. And in that context, we would say that just like we never found that because he became Bar Mitzvah, he has to recite a new bracha on his apple, so too, because he became Bar Mitzvah, he has to recite a new Asher Bachar Banu of Birchas HaTorah to be Yotzei Bracha Doraisa. But, the question still begs itself, why should this be so? Now, let me go back for...
I have a comment, and I was like, when you eat an apple, you are under no obligation to eat it. You eat it because you want to. But when you study Torah, you are under obligation to study Torah. So maybe that's the difference.
So wait a minute, I'm trying to understand, Chaim, what you're saying. You're saying that somehow the bracha that he recited on the eights, on the Priya eights when he was a katan, since he wasn't obligated to eat the Priya eights, that's why I can carry over that bracha even into his gadlus.
Yes.
But in the case of Torah study, where there's an obligation to study Torah, now there's a chidush chiyu, there's chadshus hachova, when he becomes bar mitzvah, and for that he needs a new bracha.
Correct.
So don't make an analogy between an eights and Birchas HaTorah because he has a new obligation. Okay,
that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say it the way you say it, but
you explain
I don't
much
speak
better.
no aprende el español. You know what I mean? That's my problem. Yo aprende en la escuela 2 años, but that I don't remember a word of Spanish. Okay, but now we want to just go back for 1 minute to page 447, and he says the following. He says that the two brachos of Lasok b'divrei Torah and Varevna ba al mitzvahs Talmud Torah u'birchas asher bachar banu eino kshura lemitzvahs Talmud Torah v'al ma mevarchem osal etzem halimud. Why is it that the limud is mechayev a bracha irrelevant to the kiyum mitzvah? So we're not talking, Chaim, in your terms about the obligation. We're talking about the action and the experience of limud that requires a bracha. Why? He says, Mashal Amad Dover Dover Lemisha Ochal Sapri Shemavarich Birchas Hanenim. So I guess he's saying that the Hana itself from the Pri requires you to make a bracha. Forgetting about the mitzvah, but leave out the mitzvah. There's no mitzvah here to eat the apple, but the Hana that you're going to benefit and enjoy from the eights, that requires a bracha. And he says the following, that Birchas Asher Bachar Banu Mifarchen Osal HaTorah. Again, on the Torah, mean on the Etzem Al-Limud. Sheyecholim anu lemalos cheftzenu lilmod ba v'lehenos bimenu. Okay, and then he waxes somewhat poetic here. He says, "Shu masuk mitvah, shu mishivas nafesh, u'bracha zu omedes hafilu lo haisa mitzvah lilmod Torah el rishus." So before you have this tremendous spiritual pleasure from learning Torah, you have to, like in the case of Birchas Hanenim from an eights, a Priya eights, you have to acknowledge God and recite the bracha. Bracha materes etzem alimut ke Birchas Hanenim amateres lechol es hapri. So that's the levush that we discussed last week. And now he's using the levush as a springboard to create a structure of the Tshuvas Marsham as to why when he becomes bar mitzvah, he doesn't have to repeat the bracha because he already has the mati. Again, that means he's continuously learning, and all that learning without hefsek forms an entity, uninterrupted entity, on which there was a matir. And he's saying that the matir is chal on that continuous learning. It's not a din in the mitzvah. If it was a din in the mitzvah, okay, he made the bracha, he's a katan, he wasn't a bar mitzvah. Now he's a bar mitzvah, he has to make the bracha because of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, it's a mitzvah doraisa. But we're not talking about a birchas ha-mitzvah. If we're talking about a birchas ha-mitzvah, in the bracha that he recited on the mitzvah where he's a katan, it's not going to help him. Like, for example, in Joe's case about talis. If he made the bracha on the talis when he was a katan, now he's wearing a talis of Daled Kanfos, he would likely have to make another bracha as a gadol. Because that chiyuv as a katan, in Doraisa terms, he's a lav bar chavasa, he's a lav bar chiyuv. He never made a bracha on his chiyuv because he wasn't chayav. Now he became a gadol, he has to make a bracha. But now we're saying that the third of the three brachos on Talmud Torah, which is Doraisa, Shebachar Banu, is chal on the etzem alimud. If you want to use brisket terminology, Reb Chaim would say it's on the chefza shel Torah, but it means on the hana that he gets from the Torah. And now we're going to say that an uninterrupted, continuous limud Torah forms some sort of an entity. Again, it's not a physical entity that you and I can touch or see, but it's a shall we call it a halachic entity? And in a certain sense, the Priya Eitz is also an entity. I wouldn't say the Pri as much. He puts all the emphasis on the Pri. I would say on the Achila. The Achila is a continuous Achila. Or maybe he means it's a continuous Achila because it's defined by the Chefs, by the Pri. So he hasn't yet finished his Achila. And now he became a Gadol. The Matir on that Achila continues to be Chal. You know, in other words, it's almost as if as long as he's in the throes, in the perpetual activity of achila, a continuous achila with a continuous hana, the bracha sort of leads him along. It accompanies him through that entire hana, that entire single entity of hana. And in Talmud Torah, the third bracha is going to accompany him through that entire limud. He calls it a Maisa Limud. It's one continuous Maisa Limud. And it's interesting because this is completely irrelevant to the Chova and the Mitzvah. So therefore, I can still call it one Maisa Limud because even as a Katan, he has initiated a Maisa Limud, which continues as he's a Gadol. The fact that he himself became a Gadol is not going to impact on the Maisa Limud. The Maisa Limud is an entity unto itself, continuing exist, and the bracha of the Matir is Chal on that continuous Maisa. It reminds me very much of the story about Reb Chaim and Reb Shimon. You remember the story that they were walking arm in arm, and Reb Shimon Shkop turns to Reb Chaim, and he says, you know, he has a raya, blah, 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 and he, based on this raya, he concludes that Ishus is a mischadesh b'chol rega. Every minute there's a new Ishus. So Reb Chaim turned to him, he said, "Oy bazoi, kum tira mazel tov." Right? That's a very romantic Reb Shimon. Imagine you come home to your wife and you say to her, "Mazel tov, we just got married again." Right? It's Ishus mischadeshes. But in Talmud Torah, we're saying that the chiyuv mitzvah is mischadesh, but the Maisa Limud is not mischadesh. The Maisa Limud is uninterrupted, continuous, the way Reb Chaim understood Ishus, uninterrupted and continuous, and the matir is chal like a tailgate. It's almost like, you know, you attach the matir to this continuous Maisa Limud. It's a fantastic chiddush. Honestly, I'm trying to convince myself that I can comprehend this. Now, if you think that's wild, wait till you see the next paragraph, which is based on the Sukkot of it. And as an introduction to the next paragraph, I think I told you the story 1,000,001 times, but I love the story. My father, Zichron Livracha, once came over to Rav Soloveitchik at the end of the Shia. My father used to go Tuesday nights to Moriah regularly. And of course, my father claims that the Rav said the whole Shia to him and everybody else was just listening, but that's a different story. Anyway, my father came over to Rav Soloveitchik after the Shia, and he says to him, Rebbe, I don't know if I'll get any schar in this mitzvah. So the Rav said, Rabbi Birchas, what are you talking about? So my father explained he has such a pleasure and enjoyment from hearing the shir. He would rather hear the shir than go to an opera or go to a movie or anything else. So Rav Soloveitchik said, Das heißt Torah Lishma. That's what Torah Lishma is about. And the Iglei Tal, in this paragraph that we're about to see, in his Hakdama, he writes about people who say you shouldn't benefit, you should enjoy the learning, don't get too much geschmack out of it, because that's go Rea from Torah Lishma, it becomes Torah Shalom Lishma, and the Sukkot Shabbat comes to fight a battle against that hashkaf. He says the following. He says, you might argue that Lo Yishatef Adam Hanas Atzmo B'Kiyum HaMitzvah. He should not integrate his own personal pleasure into the mitzvah. And that might be true for all mitzvahs. And the Bali Musar, some of them wanted to apply that even to Talmud Torah, that when, just like when you do a mitzvah, you shouldn't add mixture all the hanos and your personal pleasures from the mitzvah, because that's go rare from the lishma of the mitzvah. Let's apply that to Talmud Torah. The Yesha Bikshu Lichlo Bazek Gamis Mitzvahs Talmud Torah. The Amru Shegam Mitzvahs Talmud Torah. You should be completely nucky from all hana. Don't enjoy the limud at all. As soon as you start enjoying the limud, you're being gorea, you're taking away from the lishma. And they went as far as to say, as quoted by the Sukkot Shavar, Micha lomeid mechadich chidushim v'sameach u'misanig b'limudo ein zel limud Torah kol kach lishma. Like a seesaw. The more you enjoy the tainug of chidushim and the anah you get from the intellectual experience of Torah, the lower level of lishma, what they call it, a converse relationship. The Omar Aleim had more misakito. Kitosi. Hasimcha b'Torah v'anah milimudo. Eino michutz mitzvah. El miguf mitzvahs Talmud Torah he. V'gam ha'tainug, the hana itself, mitzvah. The more you enjoy the Torah, the greater your mitzvah. The exact opposite of what the so-called Baalei HaMusar was saying. Again, he doesn't identify who these Baalei Musar are. Maybe the Sukkot Shavar didn't want to insult anybody. Betosu, he says. What a mistake. The greater the simcha and the tainug, the more the hana that you have, the greater is your mitzvah. The all right, this is more Kabbalistic. HaTorah nivlas b'domo. Somehow the Torah gets absorbed into your very essence when you have a hana, tainug, and a geschmack from Torah. This is perhaps one of the most famous introductions. A lot of people don't read introductions to books, especially to Chidushei Torah. Rare are the people who read the introduction. I once tried to read the introduction to the Shev Shmaita Torah, the Ketzos HaChoshen. I got lost. It's very tedious. But this particular Akdama of the Sukkot Shavar, and Rabbi say, do you and I know what a genius the Sukkot Shavar was? If I learn a piece in the Iglei Tal and I figure it out, I'm like elated. His genius, his depth of thought. I remember he has a whole shtickle Torah about Meleches Machshavas Asr Torah. And he speaks about the difference between Ksiva and Shabbos as a Malacha and Ksiva in Stam and in Gittin and in Kol Torah Kula, whereas in Kol Torah Kula, all you need is a Maisa Ksiva. And it could be that if you're a righty and you write with the left hand, that's considered a Maisa Ksiva. But in Shabbos, there's a requirement of Meleches Machshavos. And therefore, if he writes with his left hand, that's not considered Meleches Machshavos. Again, there are so many repercussions to this Chiddush. This is the Sakacham. And that's why, my friends, I believe that Chazal say, Ein Adam Lomed Elamisha Libo Elamakom Shalibo Chavetz, because they want to expand your Talmud Torah. They want to enhance your mitzvah by getting more and more tainug and hana. If you have an area of Torah study where you could be machadish chidushim, and in that area of Talmud Torah you enjoy your learning, and you reach a level of ecstasy of tainug, that's where you should be putting your kochos. Now, some people enjoy daf yomi. Some people enjoy learning halacha. Amongst Sephardim, it's very common. They learn Yalkut Yosef or Ravad Yosef, and they love it. They're in seventh heaven. For other people, reading dry halacha is exactly that. It's dry. There's no room for chidushim. They can't throw their entire neshama into it. They find it very technical. It's a matter of memorization, the laws, the rules, and so forth and so on. It's like the Haggadah Shel Pesach. This is where you lift up the matzah, and this is where you cover the matzah, and so forth and so on. It becomes very dry and mechanical. So it all depends on the person. But a person who could learn Torah, and that's what we discussed 2 weeks ago. Again, I'm going back now in a time machine. We discussed the Gemara in Megillah. It says, Mevatlin Talmud Torah Lemikra Megillah. And we asked why. Why is that Bittul Torah? You're going to hear the Megillah Esther. It's part of Tanakh. But the answer is, if he's capable of having a real Seder Iyun and learning Torah in depth, Hamelus B'Torah, the deeper, the more Amel he is, the more it becomes part of his very essence. And he's giving that up just to hear the story of the Megillah. That's Bittul Torah. But because it's a mitzvah that was established by Chazal, and therefore we have a principle of Gadol Talmud Amevil De Maisa, that when it comes to a Maisa, like we just learned today, and I'm a little bit ahead of the Daf Yomi, it says, Mevatlin Talmud Torah, Lachnas Kala, Mevatlin Talmud Torah, Lachnas Hames, which is on Daf Zayin. There, the halacha is that Gadol Talmud Amevil De Maisa. And the Rav Shulchan Aruch writes, if you don't stop learning for the sake of a mitzvah, then it becomes Torah Shalol Almanas L'Kaima. You have, in a sense, made a declaration that your Talmud Torah is not for the sake of implementing the Torah that you learn, L'Kaima. And the Gemara says about such a person, Shalom Almanas L'Kaima, it's Noach Lo Shalom Nivra, and Shal Yosa Nefach Al Piv, and all the terrible things that it says about. So that's how Lachin Kedima, that a mitzvah gets Kedima to Talmud Torah. Comes first, you have to stop your Torah, interrupt, and do the mitzvah. Does that mean that the mitzvah is greater than Torah? I don't know. It might not mean that it's greater than Torah. It's how Lachin Kedima. Like, for example, the Gemara says about Avram Avinu, he had to stop when the Shechina came to visit him on the third day of his visit, and he was Osek B'Kabbalas Pnei Shechina. And then he sees the three Arabs to pass by. And the Rashiva of Alojin, the Ritziv, says that Avram, it says Vayar in the Pasuk twice, Avram Avinu was trying to sort this all out. What comes first over here? I'm being Mekayim, the great mitzvah, Kabbalas Pnei Shechina. But now I have mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim. And the Gemara says, based on Avraham Avinu, that we derive the conclusion that Gdol Hachnasas Orchim Yotzer Mikabbalas Pnei Shechina. So that's a din in Kedima. There are certain priorities. And what comes first and what has to take a back seat. You can't do both mitzvahs at the same time. But that doesn't mean that just because the din of Kedima is a greater mitzvah, I don't know, and inherently Hachnasas Orchim is greater mitzvah than Kabbalas Pnei Shechina. Maybe yes, maybe no, but you can't prove it from the din of Kedima. Now, Birchas HaTorah as a Birchas HaNenim is b'derech klal mevarich Birchas HaNenim lefanel mevarich v'gam lachreo. When we eat a meal, we have the bracha before the meal and the bracha after the meal. Im kain madua mevarich Birchas HaTorah Birchas HaShacha einu mevarich bracha lachreo. So I'm not sure exactly what the answer to this question is, but I once saw in the Rashba, he says that there is a chiyuv in theory to be mevarich lachreo, but there's never lachreo. There's never a moment in time when you could say, I finished the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. It's an ongoing mitzvah, she'ein lo kitzvah, she'ein lo sof v'siyum. And I once wanted to suggest, I'm not sure if it's right, that the reason why there's no bracha on Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and there are many, many answers to that question, is based on its Rashba, because it's a mitzvah she'ein lo kitzvah. It's endless. But he says, in the name of the Ritva and Megillah, that Limud HaTorah shemevarchel Birchas HaShachar chiyuvo hove bechol me'es li'es shenever avigisa bo yom v'layla ulefichach ein levarch lachreo. Maybe he's saying the Rashba. I don't know. But here I would add the Rosh. The Rosh says that if he takes an interruption in the middle of his day and he goes to work or eats a meal and then he comes back to his Talmud Torah, he doesn't have to make a bracha again. So the Rosh asks, how's it different than Sukkah? Every time I go out of the Sukkah, I come back in, I make another bracha. Here I went to work from 9 to 5, came back at 5. I don't have to make another bracha. I could study Torah. So the Rosh says that there's no such thing as a hefsek from Talmud Torah. Even when he's involved in going to work, he's still involved in Talmud Torah. He's never disconnected from Talmud Torah. In one part of his, shall we call it, subconscious mind, he is still connected to Torah. So he may have learned a half hour in the morning, comes back at night after a full day work and learns a half hour at night. So out of a day of 12 hours, he put in 1 hour of learning, but yet his day is a day of Talmud Torah. The 9 to 5 break that he took is not an interruption in his Talmud Torah because he's never Mesiach Das from Torah. He always has a constant, perpetual awareness of Torah. Maybe not in his conscious mind, but in a deeper level in his subconscious mind. And therefore the Rosh says there's no hefsek, and you don't have to make another bracha. But sukkah, he says, when a person leaves a sukkah and he goes to work, again, I'm sure if he's allowed to work on Chol Hamoed, or let's say he's in a HaTorah group and he goes out to save a life and he comes back, got to make a new bracha on the sukkah. That's called Hesech Hadas. And that, says the Rosh, is the fundamental difference between mitzvos and Talmud Torah. In mitzvos, you have a Hesech Hadas. You know, the old suffix, you took off your talisman, went into the bathroom, come out of the bathroom, took off your tefillin, come back and you put on your tefillin again, you have to make a new bracha. So that's the issue of Hesech Hadas. But in Talmud Torah, my gosh, he spent his whole day at his workplace. And now he comes back and he doesn't have to make a bracha? How could that be? Most of his day he spent there in the Geshev. But the Rosh says that's not called Hesech Hadas. He's always somehow has awareness of Talmud Torah. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of the Chazon Ish. You know, Reb Chaim said that if in the middle of Shmona Esrei, your brain moves out into, I don't know what distraction, you know, you start thinking about who knows what. Maybe you're thinking about the next shir you have to give to your Canadian friends. Maybe you're thinking about your SATs. All right, in Canada, I don't think they have SATs, but you know, you're nervous about a job interview. You're nervous about a soccer game. Who's going to win the soccer game? We have a member of our community who will fly to Europe just for a soccer game. Because your stels are far. So in the middle of his Shmona Esrei, he's thinking about who knows what. Says Reb Chaim, he missed a bracha. It's as if he omitted a bracha. He has to say Shmona Esrei again. except for one problem. The Rambam says he'll say Shmona Esrei, and he won't have kavanah a second time. So but the Chazon Ish disagrees with Reb Chaim, and he holds that there's no Hesed Hadas. Even if he's thinking about the soccer game on a deeper level, he calls it Yediyah Kea, he's still aware of the fact that he's standing in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Because the human mind operates on different levels. And the same thing here with Talmud Torah, according to the Rosh, on a deeper level, he never discontinues his connection to Torah study, despite the fact that he's involved in this or that, and he doesn't need another book. Bobby, are you still there? I thought he had something to say, but I guess, all right. Now on page 449. The Eis Kriyas HaTorah, Itzibur. Now this is really interesting. We just finished saying in the name of the mitzvah that you don't make a bracha lachreah because the mitzvah is continuous and you never got to the siyum. Now what about Kriyas HaTorah? We make a bracha at the beginning and a bracha at the end. So the answer is obvious. There's a siyum. Because this Hefzer Shel Torah begins with this parsha and ends at the end of the parsha, whatever it is. He says, "Achas lufanev yachas lachreah nireh ki gam shtei brachos elu birchas hanenim." Okay, if we're going to say the Birchas HaTorah is Asher Bacha Banu, similar to the bracha that we recite at the end of the set of three brachas, then it's a Birchas hanenim. And if there's a Birchas hanenim before the Hanoah, then how much more so you require a Birchas hanenim after the Hanoah, like it says, V'achaltem savot v'beirach. Ukeshem shalkel pri mevarach lefanel atov she's ben hakodesh baruch pri lachila. Uliachra mevarach al Hanoah mea pri v'al sveo. It's who adim b'kriyas haTorah b'tzibur. Lifnei hakriya mevarchim al shenasa lono hakodesh baruch hu es haTorah. But v'yachar hakriya mevarchim al svias hanefesh. What a beautiful phrase. Svias hanefesh. He says, Kasha, lama nishtansa ala Torah rak lefanel. This is v'gisa v'yolo shach levarach lachre mishu me'ezeh. Rak l'kriyas haTorah b'tziva yesh bracha lachre l'fi sheyesh l'shir. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we said it on our own. Now he has Rav Mordechai Patengi. Did I pronounce that right? Amira Dichya. He says, Takonis Birchas HaTorah l'fanel lachre b'kriyas hatzibur al derech harayon ishtei brachos l'shvuos u'lesimchas Torah. Shekein kvar sholu kevin shekimol haTorah b'chag hashvuos min aroi hoyelachug es simchas haTorah. Okay, this is the famous Dubna Magid as to why we only celebrate Simchas HaTorah 6 months after we receive the Torah on Chag, Simchas Torah and Shmini Atzeres. Why don't we have the same kind of Simcha Shavuos time when we actually receive the Torah? So the Dubna Magid gives a mashal, as he always does, and he speaks about a king who has one daughter. After many years, his wife, the queen, couldn't give birth. She finally had a daughter. They were thrilled, but the only thing is, in order to get the daughter, they had to go through a certain process. And they went to somebody holy, and the condition that the holy person set for them is that no one should see this girl except for those who are directly involved in raising this girl until she's under the chuppah. Now, when she became 18, it was time to find a prince to marry the princess. And the king sends out a crew. Who wants to marry my daughter? And initially, there was a tremendous response. I mean, every prince of every state, this was a major state. But then they found out that the condition was that they couldn't see her until after they get under the chuppah. Well, it's too late to back out. And when that word got out, everybody dropped out except for one prince. And he said, I'm willing to marry her no matter what. And after they got married, he was afraid to pull up the veil. He didn't know what kind of, pardon the expression, monster he would be looking at, that they wouldn't allow anyone to see her. And when he saw her, he realized how beautiful she was. You could imagine his simcha. But he still had some nervous hesitation. Maybe she's psychologically, impaired. Maybe she's mentally impaired. Like, what's going on? 6 months later, he made an announcement in the entire kingdom that there's going to be a special celebration, like Achashverosh, and they're going to have everything, Kishtia, Kedas, and Ones. So people asked him, why didn't you make this celebration 6 months earlier when you married the princess? He said, it took me 6 months to get to know her and to realize what a precious, incredible human being she is. And now that I realize that and I appreciate it, this is like I just got married to her. And I want to make a simcha. So the Dubna Maggid said the same thing as with Chagat Shavuos. We said Nasa v'Ishma, we got to 613, and we were a little bit nervous about it. After all, everybody else dropped out. It was just us. So we were afraid to make a big simcha on Chagat Shavuos. It took us 6 months until finally we got to know the Kala, and that's Simchas Torah. That's when we could break out in celebration. Now he quotes the Beis HaLevi. The Beis HaLevi is bothered by the Gemara in Masechta Nedarim Peyal. The Gemara says that Alma of the Aretz al shelo berchu b'Torah tchila. Again, there's a whole Gemara there. They asked the Navi, why did we lose Eretz Yisrael? And they asked the Chachamim. Finally, they got to the Rebbeinu Shalom. He said, al shelo berchu b'Torah tchila. They didn't recite Birchas HaTorah. So the Ran interprets it, this way before the Beis HaLevi, that they took the study, their attitude towards the study of Torah was equal to the study of any chachma, of any wisdom, any secular body of knowledge, like science or math or physics or chemistry. They weren't excited about the Torah. They thought the Torah is another intellectual discipline. They didn't recognize the godless, the greatness of the Torah. And therefore, they didn't thank Hashem for the Torah. They didn't evaluate the Torah properly. They didn't appreciate the Torah properly. But the Beis HaLevi has a different approach. He says that there are two dimensions to the mitzvah Talmud Torah, two agendas, two purposes. One is ladas es ha-mitzvos v'eich l'kaimon, to know the mitzvahs and know how to fulfill them. And in that sense, Limud Torah is a means to an end, the end being that I know exactly how to fulfill and implement the mitzvah Torah. However, there's another dimension to Talmud Torah, and that is Limud Torah Lishma, which means without any connection to Maisa, to Kiyum mitzvos, to implement the Torah. It's like the Gemara, Chazal say about Ben Sor Morer, Lohoiv Lo Nivra, El Josh V'Kavel Tzfar. So if you're learning the parsha of Ben Sor Morer, that's Torah on the highest level. He calls it Torah Lishma, which is not L'Shem Kiyum HaMitzvos. It's not a means to an end, it's an end unto itself. So the Beis HaLevi says they didn't make a bracha tchila. You know why they didn't make a bracha tchila? They thought that Talmud Torah is a mitzvah that exhausts itself in preparing oneself for the Kiyum HaMitzvahs. So, for example, if I'm learning, I gave the example before about the mitzvah of Achilas Matzah, Achilas Moror, about Sibritis Mitzrayim. All my learning is for the point and the purpose of implementing achilas matzah and being mekayim the mitzvah matzah more and sipur tishmas. Why did they leave out the bracha? Because the principle in the Gemara Menachos of Birchas HaMitzvah is ein mevarchim el al gemara mitzvah. On the machshirei mitzvah, those introductory parts, even if they're necessary, you don't make a bracha. And if the purpose and the agenda, the goal of Talmud Torah is l'kiyum mitzvahs, then I'm not going to make a bracha on Talmud Torah. Hayisaver hayisvurim shalibon haTorah the mitzvah v'neyatzma ela mitzvah leida hech l'kayim mitzvahs v'tachlis hamitzvah kiyum mitzvahs befal. And ein mevarchim ela gemara mitzvah. This is not a gemara mitzvah. It's only an introduction. It's only a means to an end. We don't make a bracha on the means to an end. And that's true for all mitzvahs. And there's an issue about creating a lulav, putting together the daled minim into one. In the Yerushalmi, they made a bracha on that. And it could be on making the sukkah they made a bracha. The question is what bracha they made. Some say they only made a Hegyonei. But those are exceptions to the rule. The rule is that when you create a mitzvah, you don't make a bracha. You only make a bracha when you implement it. So the mitzvah Talmud Torah is l'kayim es hamitzvah. So they left out the bracha. He says that limud Torah is a mitzvah unto itself. That was the second dimension of Talmud Torah, without any connection to asiyah and kiyum mitzvahs. And we gave the example of Ben Torah Mor. Now, which part of Talmud Torah, in the mind of the people, would deserve a bracha? Well, if the tachlis of Torah is asiyas mitzvah, then the limud itself doesn't deserve a bracha. It's not gemara mitzvah. But if, on the other hand, Talmud Torah is a mitzvah unto itself, not a means to an end, but every Talmud Torah I learn, b'li kesher, l'kiyum mitzvahs, is a separate mitzvah, then I make a bracha on Talmud Torah. But they didn't have that appreciation for Torah, that Torah has a second dimension to it. Namely, Talmud Torah is an end unto itself. And they thought mistakenly, it was a terrible mistake, that the mitzvah Talmud Torah exhausts itself in a means to an end, and it's not a mitzvah unto itself. It doesn't deserve a bracha. And the Beis Halevi writes that their Talmud Torah, which they thought was only a means to an end to kiyum mitzvah, lo hitzilosam min hachet. We have a special status of Talmud Torah, that Talmud Torah is meant to protect the person from sin. Shekei limud Torah lishma skulasa lahoya lahatzi. According to Beis Halevi, what is limud Torah lishma? Lishma means not for the sake of kiyum mitzvahs, but independent of kiyum mitzvahs. And that's how he explains nasa l'nishma. What's the dimu nasa l'nishma? And if they would have said nishma and then nasa, it would imply that the nishma is for the sake of the nasa. But no. Nasa will do the mitzvahs, and you'll tell us how to do the mitzvahs. We'll learn all the instructions and the technical, mechanical methodologies of implementing the mitzvah. But then, after the nasa, we have nishma. And nishma means I already know how to do the mitzvahs. But nevertheless, I'm going to study the mitzvahs as an end unto itself. And here, my friends, we're up to page 452, if you have that. Now we're going to study the Pri Chadash and the Shagasari. They both came up with the same kash on the Rambam. I'm excited because there's a shelf here right behind me. I have on it all the volumes of the Pri Chadash and the original Shagasari as well. The problem is we're downsizing. We have to figure out what to do with my library. I don't know, Gentlemen, you probably never had that. Did you ever have that? We had to move into a smaller place. Can you imagine after living here for almost 40 years? And I tried to explain to the Israelis what junk means. I couldn't come up with a Hebrew word for junk. Bruce, do you know how to say junk in Hebrew? So one of the Israelis said to me, Zevel. I said, Chas v'sholom, it's not Zevel. It's like my wife has a collection of baskets, straw baskets, 3 levels, going from there all the way to here. So she says, so what am I going to do with my baskets? I said the wrong thing. I said, throw them right out. My basket collection? You know how many chasanim and collars I helped with these baskets to set up their simcha? So I said to her, start a new collection. But this is the challenge that we're facing. If you happen to know a good mover, please let me know. But not a mover in Canada, it's not going to help me much. It'll cost more to get them here to Israel than the entire move. How much does it cost now a ticket to Israel? I could just tell you that my son-in-law wanted to go to California. They wanted $3,500, American dollars. I know we are still on par like when I was in Canada. No. Anyway, $3,500 to get on a plane to California. Miss Sugar. My wife just came back from a trip to be with her mother for an eye surgery. Her ticket cost $2,500. I remember paying $600 for a ticket. Again, you had to go through Spain, but okay, it wasn't so bad. Anyway, so according to the Rambam, if Birchas HaTorah is Rabbanan, then why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu say to them, you're going to lose Eretz Yisrael, you're going to go into exile because you didn't make a bracha on Talmud Torah and fulfill a mitzvah d'Rabbanan? Lama nenshu b'onesh chamur kol kach al she'ovdon es haaretz el muchach shebirchas HaTorah doraisa. The answer is this hate, this sin, and this pagam, and this punishment has nothing to do with the oraisas and the rabbanans. It has to do with their value, their evaluation and appreciation for Torah. The fact that they omitted Torah study is a Gili Milsa. It indicates that they missed the whole point about what Talmud Torah is. Talmud Torah is not like other studies and other disciplines and other secular knowledge. Talmud Torah has an inner meaning to it. It's part of the eternal, infinite wisdom of the Almighty. And the Mishnah says in Avos, Asara Shiyoshvim Velim, I don't know about Zoom, but anyway, he's talking about where they're all together face to face. Maybe we could stretch it to Zoom. And Shechina Shruya Beineim. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, V'chamisha minayin, V'shlosha minayin, V'afilu echad sheyoshev hashchina shoreimo. One person learning Torah by himself. So the entire enterprise of studying Torah is an opportunity to get close to the Shechina. And what is Eretz Yisrael? Eretz Asher Eini Hashem Alkecha Bami Reishis Hashana Ve'Achris Hashem. It means the Shechina is Shora. Why did Yonah run away to Chutz La'aretz? Because he didn't want to get Nevuah. Nevuah comes from Shechina, and the Shechina is not in Chutz La'aretz, it's in Eretz Yisrael. So Alma of the Oretz, Al Shelo Birchu B'Torah Tchila, irrelevant whether Birchas HaTorah is Doraisa or Rabbanan. But the Birchas HaTorah, when recited properly, is an indication that I understand and I appreciate what Torah is all about. It's an opportunity to get close to the Shechina. And Mida Keneged Mida, if they did not appreciate getting close to the Shechina, they lose and forfeit Eretz Yisrael, because the whole point of Eretz Yisrael is Shechina Shorah Eretz Yisrael. Nimtzenu lemeida b'divrei Arad shekachi darka shel Torah v'alei chayav adam lishkor al limuda aval lo dai bazeh. It's not enough to dedicate time to Torah. Ela shechayav lahachshiv es erecha What's the erech of Torah? Do you appreciate, do you evaluate Torah for what it is, the infinite experience? You know that the Baal Tanya, in the 5th chapter of the Tanya, a very famous chapter, writes about how when you think about a migu, that Reuven said to Shimon, you owe me 100. And Shimon said, I paid you back. And Shimon could have said, Lo hayidvar miolam. We believe Shimon the migu. Says the Baal Tanya, when you think those thoughts, you are now taking the Chachma of Hashem and you are uniting it with your seichel, with your nefesh, and the Chachmas Hashem, B'Kadosh Baruch Hu B'Atzmo are echad, and therefore when you have this intake through a migu, you are echad b'yichud nifla she'ein kemoso. Do we appreciate Talmud Torah? You know that the Baal, or what's it called? Or Chaim HaKadosh, Rav Chaim ben Atar, he writes that if we would appreciate Noam HaTorah, it would be so overwhelming, we would never ever think of stopping to learn Torah. The Noam HaTorah is so great. It's like if you're in Gan Eden, you know, you're going to step out of Gan Eden to go see a movie, to go for a spazier, to put on your ice skates and go out on the ice skating rink. How could you give up an opportunity of Noam HaTorah? Umisha Edo Makir Be'erko Shel Davar Ein Lo Chelet V'Kinyan Bo. Like the Ibn Ezra says about Benos Slavcha, by you it's next week's parsha, right? Did I get that right? Well, you didn't say Pinchas, you didn't read Pinchas, this Shabbos. So he says, Tnulot al Achuza, he has rayas that Achuza is not like a Kinyan Karka. Achuza means something that gives you an infinite bond to something. What they were asking for, B'no Sofka, is not a piece of real estate. Although, I'll be honest with you, you know, the real estate here is pretty good. And I don't know if it's Canada, I don't know, but you know how many times my wife and I, you know, even when we're driving, why didn't we buy that? You know, they first started the Chalutzim in Efrat about 30 years ago. You could get in Efrat a piece of land for nothing, for cheap. Today, forget it. You're talking for a small place, they want 4 million shekel. How much is that in Canadian dollars? I don't know. Can somebody figure that out in the conversion? I mean, it's a lot of money. But we missed all these opportunities. But that wasn't what motivated B'no Slavcha. Says the Ibn Ezra, they wanted a chelik in Olam Haba. They understood that Eretz Yisrael is Shechina, and that connection to Shechina is going to give them Olam Haba. And Noshim Echavos is Eretz Yisrael. You know, the men said, Nitna Rosh v'Nashuva Mitzrayim. After the Meraglim. And the women say, we don't want any part of this. We want to go to Eretz Yisrael. It's the Nashim Tzidkanios of that door. Even at the time of the Egel Hazah, when the men came to the women and they said, Pirku Nizmei Zah, and the women wanted to, we don't want to be part of this. So the story of the B'no Slavcha is part of a repeating story, a repeating saga of Nashim Tzidkanios Sheba'os Adar. And this week here in Eretz Yisrael, we're going to read Pashas Matos. What's the question about Matos? Everybody asks, what's the connection between Matos and Pinchas? You know, Pinchas was the great zealot, the great warrior, and God gives him Brisi Shalom and everything else. But what does that have to do with Matos, with the mitzvah of Nidarim? So one of the answers, which I think is very relevant to what we're discussing now, and maybe with this we'll wrap it up to today, is that Kanoim Pogimbo of Pinchas means that Pinchas went out of his way out on a limb put his life in danger, took up the Romach against the Nasi V'Shevet Yisrael, and was he obligated to do so? There was no obligation to do so. It's halacha ve'en morinken. It's kanoim pogimbo. There's no chiyuv. And that's what Nedarim is all about. Who asked you to take a neder? Who forced you? Who compelled you? Who required of you? Is there a mandate that you should have taken the neder? Every neder is an act of kanos. Why? Because you realize, as the Gemara says in Nedarim, that the Yetzer Hara is getting the best of you. You need an extra protection. You can't control yourself. Halavai, after you take the neder, you'll be able to control yourself. But you step out of the Dalet Amos of mitzvos, and it's amazing because you're talking about something which is a hefted that Torah, and now it becomes a hefted Isur by virtue of your neder. For yourself, you create a shtickle Torah. It's a brand new Torah. The Torah doesn't prohibit me from eating this loaf of bread, but now I can't eat the loaf of bread. Why? Because I took a neder. I felt that I have to separate myself from this loaf of bread. And that's an act of kanos. So Talmud Torah becomes, in a sense, a classic example of something that could protect you from hate, from Yetzer Hara, something that, although it has a bare minimum chiyuv, the Gemara says, "B'gisa b'yomam v'layla." But beyond that, it's kanoim pogimbo. I need the Torah. I love the Torah. I evaluate the Torah. I realize it's infinite. I realize what it could do to me, the impact it can have on my nefesh, the connection I can have with the Shekhinah. This is Olam Haba. And this is Eretz Yisrael as well. So Yiratzah, may it be His will, that we be motivated and inspired to appreciate Lasok b'Torah. Heim rotzen leber shachas. And we should take it upon ourselves. And this has to do with the Beis HaMikdash as well. That we cling to Torah, which is a clinging to Dveikus and Hashem, into Shekhinah, and then we'll be zocher that if we didn't appreciate Torah properly, chas v'sholom, and we didn't make the bracha before the Torah, we lost Eretz Yisrael as a result. Now we appreciate the Torah. We will be mevarech ala Torah. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'nosan lanu es Torah. So the great gift of the Torah, I know that we get from the Torah, the tainug, which the Sakacheva says is essentially part of the mitzvah Talmud Torah. We appreciate all that and the infinite value and impact that it has on our souls, and then we'll get back Eretz Yisrael. And the secret of it, there's another benefit of getting back to Eretz Yisrael. It's the end of COVID. So hopefully the prices of flights will go down a little bit at the time of the Gula. I don't know. I don't know about the real estate. I better buy now before it goes up and up. They used to say buy an Afula. You remember those days? Today Afula became expensive. All right, Rabosai. Thank you very much. Good. Have a great day and a great week.
Belated.
Thank you so much. It's a big one, it's a round number. The Israelis call it Lishanot Kidome. Are you familiar with that?
You mean it's 50 years old?
So on the bus, my daughter had made a cake, and it had 70 on it. But something happened. The cake fell because we didn't know exactly where on the bus to put it, and the 0 fell off. No, it's a true story. So all that was left with the 7. So we made an announcement. Please, everyone, look for a 0. Nobody found the 0, so we're left with the 7. So I quoted the Rashi about Chaisara, Kibbas Sheva. Anyway, I guess everyone.